Welcome in to the Monday edition of the Southeastern 14 podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Blake Lovell joins me as he does just about every episode of the podcast. Barry Allen's got the day off today. But Blake, let's talk some baseball. The SEC race, we figured for a while was going to be pretty interesting. It is. We're going down to the final couple of weeks. I think Mississippi State is now the favorite for reasons I'll get into later and reasons I wrote about last night. But in any case, you've got probably a four-team race, maybe 5 or 6 teams if there's a miracle in Oxford or Gainesville, but probably a four-team race at this point. It just is going to be fascinating to see how this plays out. It's going to be fascinating to see what the NCAA does, which I think is a decision on hosting that'll now be Thursday instead of Monday. Might even be Friday. But in any case, lots of drama ahead, and it was another fun weekend around the SEC.
Yeah, I was going to say it was pretty wild when you kind of looked around at how some of the games played out for sure. And, I mean, there were just, I guess there's a lot of different directions you could go in. I mean, I know you got to see Vandy. I know the game on Sunday got canceled because it was raining like crazy here. But yeah, it was just a fun weekend, like you said, just a lot of different storylines that sort of played out. And I guess it's really hard to even know where to start because there was a lot of different things that were happening throughout the weekend. And like you said, it kind of makes for a much more interesting race. Tennessee gets a sweep, and you go from there. And yeah, it's just you got a lot of good teams, like we've said all season. But it was a pretty interesting weekend based on how some of these games unfolded.
You now have 6 teams in the league that have won 33 games or more overall. That just occurred to me as we're doing this. I don't know how many teams elsewhere have won 33. I guess TCU's won 34. Fairfield's sitting there at 32-1. I watched a little bit of that game yesterday while I was waiting for the SEC to come on. Fairfield dug itself about a 6-0 hole and I guess pulled out of that one. Texas 38-12. You got Arizona 32-13. Really, it's kind of a 3-team conference race this year at the top. I mean, you got Notre Dame in the ACC, but 25-10 overall. The ACC, of course, didn't play as many out-of-conference games as some other leagues. But, yeah, I mean, the SEC has just been dominant. And the reason I say I think State's the favorite is you look at the schedule from here on out. State plays Missouri 3 games at home, which I hate to pick on Missouri. That's as close to an automatic 3-0 as you get. I think if your other teams in the league, you're just praying there's a rain out in
Right.
Starkville this weekend at some point so that the State doesn't get 3 games in. And then they go to Alabama. That's pretty manageable. Alabama's a good team, but State, I think everybody would say, clearly the better team there. Of course, that'll be senior weekend, I would guess, in Tuscaloosa, so that maybe adds a layer of drama. I think that Tennessee and Arkansas, the loser of that series is probably done for the conference race. And really the winner may need to go 3-0, which I don't see either of those teams doing. A wrench thrown in it by Mother Nature this weekend in Nashville with Vandy, Alabama, the Sunday game getting rained out, as I think both teams were starting to run a little thin on pitching. I wouldn't say that they couldn't have both made it because they could have, but I don't know how much that factored into things or not. Florida 15-9, just too far out at this point. I think 2 games back with games at Arkansas and Georgia at home. So, barring something crazy from the Gators, they're done. And Ole Miss really shoots itself in the foot, losing 2 at Texas A&M. I mean, just when you think Ole Miss is getting right, I don't know how that happened. I still cannot figure out how this team has lost 5 or 6 series in a row at this point. I mean, they start out by sweeping Auburn and Alabama out of the gate. 5 of the last 6 series losses. I mean, you're looking at the overall record, 33-14. You look at the stat sheet, the way those guys hit the ball up and down the lineup. You know the arms those guys have, and I know injury is part of it there with Hoagland and Nikhazy being hurt, and now Hoagland apparently being hurt again. But it just doesn't add up to me for Ole Miss. That has just been a strange season in Oxford.
Yeah, I was going to say, we kept looking at the schedule. And we were like, well, you obviously go back, I guess, a couple of weeks ago now, they lost that series to LSU, and you're like, well, schedule really doesn't ease up all that much either at that point. And that was kind of when we were still trying to figure out, okay, is this going to be one of those extended things where, they go out and have this long streak. And then, of course, they come back and sweep South Carolina and you're like, okay, well, maybe things are fine. But yeah, it is. It's been a strange season. Like you said, we've talked about some of those teams that have had weird seasons like Auburn with some of the close games and such. But yeah, for Ole Miss, I mean, it's just man. You even look at like if you just go up and down, like how some of the games they played. We talked about just
Yeah.
some of the wild games they've had in various forms. Whether it's them winning or them losing. Yeah, it's been a pretty wild season to say the least for Ole Miss. And like you said, I mean, it doesn't get any easier now because now you're looking at Vanderbilt coming up this weekend, and then you go to Georgia. I mean, I thought Georgia and Arkansas was pretty interesting, wasn't it? I mean,
Yes, it
it
was.
was
I
much more
watched part of that
interesting
game.
than
Yeah,
maybe
part of
people
that.
thought because I know Arkansas winds up winning, 2 of 3. But even if you go back to that game, what was it, Friday night? Like that was, I mean, that was a close game. It was 1-0 until I think the 8th. And then of course Georgia had the lead on Sunday. So yeah, that was won the game Saturday and then had the lead for a bit there on Sunday. So that was a pretty wild series there too.
Yeah, Georgia had a lead. Goodness, Sunday I think 4-3 in the seventh, no, that wasn't the score because the final ended up being 5-3 Arkansas, but maybe it was a 3-3 game in the seventh or something like that. Georgia was right there with the shot to win, but Arkansas's bats are just too potent. Boy, if Georgia wins that one, then that's the only team in the country that would have had a series win over Arkansas and Vandy, but it wasn't to be. Yeah, I mean, back to the top here. I think Arkansas is still the best team in the league, but the schedule the last 2 weekends at Tennessee, now they catch Florida with the Gators with a little bit of momentum. I think that's going to be interesting. The wrench and everything, again, was the Vandy Alabama series because now that's the only game that's been canceled all year, which I don't think any of us expected. So now Vanderbilt probably not going to be involved in a tiebreaker at any point because it's going to have one fewer game and they'll decide things on winning percentage. But I think that the way that the weekend played out, I think that really tilted the scales to State. But my goodness, I just look at this. I say I think there's 4 elite teams. I think there's 2 really good teams in Florida and Ole Miss. And then you have South Carolina, which God help me, I don't know what to do with those guys anymore.
Yeah.
That they darn near got swept on their field by Mississippi State, and if that happens, you wonder what the psyche is like in Columbia this morning.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, we were just talking about them and the Ole Miss thing, and it's like, man, you don't know because that's where I mean, we were kind of angling everything towards Ole Miss whenever we were going into that series. But then you come out of it, and you're like, well, South Carolina gets swept. Well, what do you do now? And then, like you said, you come out and lose the first 2 games of that series against Mississippi State, and one of them, 9-0 there in the game on Friday, and then you have to need 11 innings to win the game on Sunday. So yeah, not an ideal finish to the season here. And then, like you've mentioned, I mean, they've still got Tennessee, and they've got to go to Kentucky. So yeah, I don't know what to make of South Carolina, but I mean, it is interesting. Like you said, the setup is going to be pretty fascinating. I know the discussion we'll be having. I know Barry will be excited to talk about that one. We'll get into Tennessee and Arkansas heading into the weekend, but I mean, just keep looking up at Tennessee, and it's like, man, they should have went to Missouri and swept Missouri, and that's what they did. And that's just a team that, as we talked about all year, they have just got that extra something, and it's been impressive to see. But yeah, to see them sitting up there, you got Tennessee and Arkansas coming up this weekend. Like you said, I think you look around at some of these other teams and what's going to happen with Ole Miss. Where does South Carolina go from here? But then you've got Mississippi State sitting there with a pretty nice path here. And so, yeah, that's going to make for a pretty fun next couple weeks here to see how this all unfolds.
Well, injuries are starting to play a factor, and one that we haven't really talked about. Josh McAllister made probably the catch of the year against Arkansas. I think it was Saturday. I don't know if you got a chance to see it, but he's playing second and just runs. And when I say a dead sprint, I mean a dead sprint that I don't think he stopped
Right.
even to get the ball. And he dives in right field, going towards that right field foul line and makes a catch kind of over the shoulder. Tremendous play, but he's really hit the ball well for Georgia, and he's missed a couple of series, but I mean, he's got 9 home runs for the year, 5 in the league. That's a kid that in in a year where the margins for error are really slim because this league is so good, that's one that I wonder, like, how differently would that have gone for Georgia? Was there a game or two in there that they lost that he could have played that would have made a difference? But you're starting to see a lot of teams around the league have that issue. I think the big headliners this weekend were on the pitching side. You have Gunnar Hoagland at Ole Miss, who was pulled from his start 18 pitches in. That certainly contributed to the series loss in College Station. You had Jack Leiter wasn't even on the 30-man roster for Vanderbilt. I don't think anybody knew that was coming. You'd heard some whispers of that in Nashville that he might get some rest, but I think they listed him on the rotation for the weekend. I'd have to go back and look that up for sure, but that was something that when the news hit Saturday morning, and I think Kendall Rogers broke that kind of sent shockwaves around the SEC and the country. So really, I think that's the thing is I watched those two teams. Hoagland, now this is twice that he's going to miss a start or miss some time because they held him out a couple of weeks ago. He came back, pitched great. You're thinking he's okay. With Leiter, we have noted that the effectiveness just hasn't been there. I mean, the kid was unhittable all year. The last 3 starts, he gives up 8 home runs. Location is not the same. I would not be shocked if we don't see Leiter again till Hoover, but who knows? But I was really looking forward, Blake, to that Ole Miss Vanderbilt series. That might have been the one before the season that I circled and said I look forward to the most because those teams have kind of an underrated rivalry. And you look at them and you said, boy, Doug Nikhazy for Ole Miss and Hoagland for Ole Miss going up against Leiter and Rocker at Vanderbilt. And then they've got some talent elsewhere on those pitching staffs. That series in Oxford now probably going to be a shell of what we thought it would be, especially with the Rebels going to College Station and losing 2 or 3 there.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I can remember back we were, kind of looking ahead at the schedule and trying to figure out those ones that really stood out, and then that was one kept pointing to. But as you mentioned, I mean, you just kind of look at the Leiter thing with Vanderbilt. That's been something that's just been, you'd asked us whatever a month and a half ago, we just could have never sort of predicted how that was going to play out. And then you just look at it overall. You said, I mean, you look at kind of how things unfolded there at Florida. They lose the game at Louisville. And now, I mean, this Ole Miss thing, which we just talked about, like it's just kind of one of those where you don't have any idea really what you're going to get from Ole Miss, no matter kind of what the situation is. So it is going to make it interesting. I guess there's intrigue just for the fact that you don't really, it seems like a pretty unpredictable series at this point, based on the nature of Ole Miss and like we talked about just with the pitching for Vanderbilt. So yeah, I mean that's I guess at this point in the season, and I'm sure we just go back and like you talked about with injuries and such, like it just kind of this point in the season, it's a grind, like we know it is, and some of these teams that are able to kind of hold it together overall. I mean, I feel like we've seen Arkansas, Tennessee, do that for the most part. I mean, we've seen Vanderbilt do it from a win standpoint, but as you said, I mean, one of their strengths was having a guy like Leiter who can go, after Kumar Rocker. So that's going to be interesting, I think, to see how that plays out. And obviously, I mean, it's a huge series for Vanderbilt. It's a huge series for both, but it is one that I think that, if you're trying to predict and figure out how it's going to play out, I think there's probably 3 or 4 different scenarios you could see kind of play out in that one.
All right, quick quiz. I'm going to see if you can get this.
Oh.
What SEC team now leads the league in runs in conference play and in run differential?
Runs in conference play and run differential.
Don't you love I put you on the spot?
Well, I mean, off the top of my head, I would probably think Tennessee, but I mean, that's...
You're right. That's
I was going to say like that. I'm just thinking of just runs scored. Like, and I was thinking, I don't know if there's another team that scored as many runs as they have because we talked about some of the outbursts they've had. So that would have been my first guess just thinking about it. But I mean, it's like we talked about it many times now. You talk about just the runs they put up. It's pretty crazy. And I remember back whatever it was last week, the week before, we were talking about, well, they scored 15 runs in 3 innings here and 14 runs in 4 innings here. And they have been really, really good.
Yeah, they have. And of course, it's going to get a lot tougher for Tennessee. Vols host Arkansas this weekend in what I think will be a fascinating series, then go to South Carolina. Well, let's get to the Gamecocks for a minute. That team, just when you think you figured them out, you haven't. They have gone, what was it? They had lost 6 or 7 straight heading into game 3 in Nashville, and then they get that series salvaging win on Sunday to where they lose that 2-1, but then they go and they win their next 3 series, which were at Georgia, Missouri, and at LSU, which you can say maybe the schedule eased up. And before that, they sweep Florida. So they win 4 in a row at this point. Now they've lost 3 in a row. They were that close to getting swept this weekend by Mississippi State and Columbia. But Mark Kingston pointed out, Blake, that the last time this happened, that they were kind of reeling and they got that game 3 win. That turned the momentum and gave them some confidence. He says, well, I feel like I can feel that in our dugout that we gained some confidence from that, something along those lines. But they go to Kentucky this weekend, and then they finish with Tennessee and Columbia. Now, I don't know how the committee is going to play it because Carolina is sitting there 12-12 in the league, and a 500 team in a conference never hosts. But the Gamecocks are 12 in the RPI, and I don't know how the committee is going to play it. Is it going to say, well, we're going to judge things on what's been done already? Or is it going to say, we're going to allow for the possibility that this team finishes, say, 4-2, 5-1 over the last 6 games? And at that point, like if South Carolina is 17-13, for example, then they're hosting with that strength of schedule and everything. I just am curious. That's going to be an interesting test case for how the committee is going to play this. Is it just going to say your resume is what it is at this point and we're not considering anything else? Or is it going to factor in this team's gotten on a run before and it's got an opportunity in front of it to make up some games, and the RPI is host worthy even if the conference record is not? I think it's going to be a very interesting week to see if South Carolina is among the 20, and if it is, if it can finish off and get a hosting spot. I have a feeling the SEC is only going to get 6, so I think that probably 2 of 3 between Ole Miss, Florida, and Carolina are going to be hosting. All that could be 1 of 3. Especially with the way Ole Miss has floundered lately. But again, like Carolina, that RPI right there at 11. So it's going to be fascinating to see what happens this week when hosting decisions come down. And it's going to be fascinating to see how Carolina ends its season, because I have felt all year that was a team that's a little bit better than it got credit for. But I don't know. Every passing week, it makes me think that I've not sized that team up right. I don't know.
Yeah, that Ole Miss series, I think, is the one that's going to probably be glaring to me, as you look back at the season for them. And like you said, yeah, you can go all the way back to kind of that stretch early where they had lost those games. They lost so many in a row. It was Texas, Davidson, and then the 2 to Vanderbilt before winning that game on Sunday. But you just look at the Ole Miss one, and it's like, man, Ole Miss, we had said, and we talked about it. I mean, they've now lost 5 of 6 series. And they just came in with not a lot of confidence, but then to go out and get the sweep against South Carolina, and I think you see, they come out now, and we knew it was going to be challenging for them to try to win a series against Mississippi State, and South Carolina's been a team that's been better at home than on the road, for sure. But when you're playing better teams, like it's just you put yourself in that position, and now you're struggling to try to figure out what you've got to do the rest of the way. And I mean, even that, certainly you go to the end of the season, the one you're going to have here in a week and a half against Tennessee, but like even that one against Kentucky, like right now, if you're sitting back and saying, do I think South Carolina's going to go in there and sweep this series, being that they've not been a good team on the road? Not really. Like, I don't know that the confidence is there. It's kind of the same thing we talked about with Kentucky getting off to, winning that first game against Florida the way they did. Obviously, Florida rebounded, but I don't have any confidence that South Carolina's going to necessarily at this point be able to go in there and get all 3 from Kentucky or put themselves in that kind of position. I mean, could you see them losing that series? Maybe. So I think it's going to be interesting, like you said, to see kind of how it goes out. But I think if we look back at it, there's no doubt that the series against Ole Miss is the one that's really going to kind of stand out like a sore thumb, just based on where Ole Miss was at heading into that series, and kind of where South Carolina was, just knowing that that was a pretty big opportunity, and they just went down there and could not find a way to get any win. So,
Well, yeah, and what makes it more confusing is that there's a sweep of Carolina in there for Ole Miss, as you mentioned, sandwiched between a series loss to a reeling LSU team in
yeah,
Oxford, and then going to Bluebell Park and losing a pair of one-run games. Not that A&M's a bad team, right? I don't think that there's any bad teams in this league other than Missouri. But in terms of easiest to beat, that's one of your better opportunities. I think at this point, you got three teams in Auburn, A&M, and then Missouri that are clearly trailing the pack. So I just think if you're going to be an elite team and try to get a national seed, that's a series you have to win. So missed opportunity there. But I want to flip to Kentucky because I'm sitting at Hawkins Field watching Vanderbilt and Alabama, and I'm looking at my phone, and I've got my game on Game Tracker. And Kentucky's up 5-4 in the night after
right.
having won on Friday. They are one strike away, and then they give up 4 runs, lose that game, and lose Sundays. That really turned, I think, the fates for both teams because, as I've said, what happens to Florida as a host if they go up there and they lose 2 or 3? Well, they were darn close to doing that. And then what happens to Kentucky, which is kind of a bubble team? If Kentucky takes 2 or 3 from Florida, then all of a sudden they're 12-12, and they've got a series win over Alabama and a series win over Florida. But just one pitch of that game may have completely swung the fate of Kentucky's season.
No, and that may be good for South Carolina, right? Because coming up
Right,
this
right.
weekend, so
Who's less demoralized as they play this
yes,
series?
right. That may be a good thing for South Carolina, but yeah, that was a wild one to see how that finished, and knowing that they were literally a strike away from, winning that series before you even play the game on Saturday. So, yeah, I mean it's going to be interesting. Like we said, that was one that Florida had to have. I mean, we knew that going in. We didn't really know exactly. I mean, we were saying, that's a very intriguing series just on paper, kind of knowing that, Kentucky, if they're able to come out and win the first game, which they did, that makes it a lot more interesting. And like we said, probably should have won the game on Friday. But yeah, I mean, it's, for Florida, as we mentioned, the issues have been well documented all season long with them, but just to find a way to win, to come back and win both of those games, knowing that again you're one strike away from really scratching your heads heading into these final two series. Now you come back with a little bit more momentum. You're able to finish that series off with a pretty convincing 9-2 win on Saturday, and now you get to regroup, come back, and then like we mentioned for Kentucky. That makes the South Carolina series, just all the things we mentioned with South Carolina, just makes it very unpredictable because you don't know exactly how Kentucky's going to rebound from that, knowing they still got to play South Carolina here for 3 games, and they got to go to Vanderbilt to finish the season. So not an easy finish, and where those wins come from for Kentucky, you would probably think that they've got to come here against a reeling South Carolina team versus trying to go find some wins at Vanderbilt to finish the season.
LSU, let's talk about the Tigers for a minute. Okay, let's revisit the end of week 3 in SEC play. LSU has gone 1-8 between Mississippi State, Tennessee, and Vandy, the first and third series there in Baton Rouge. Since then, State has won 3 of 5 series. Now, look, at Kentucky, at Auburn, the road series, but not the top of the heap in the league. But still, you beat anybody on the road in the league. That's something. Win at Ole Miss, as we talked about, and then home losses 2 or 3 to South Carolina and Arkansas. So I don't know what it is with this team that it seems to be playing better on the road than at home.
Yeah.
But LSU sitting there all of a sudden very stealthily at 9-15. So that means they've gone 8-7 since that start. RPI of 22, strength of schedule of 4. Alabama coming up in Baton Rouge this weekend. That's a huge series for both those teams. I think LSU, that may be a loser goes home series.
Yeah.
Because Alabama's got Mississippi State and LSU goes to A&M. But let's say LSU wins one of those two. It's sitting there at 10-17. even if it sweeps A&M at 13 and 17, I don't know. That might be good enough. Um, I don't know. LSU has very interestingly put itself in position to get in the tournament. Now, look, here's the thing that's interesting. As many bats as they've got, Blake, and I love their freshman Morgan and Cruz.
Yeah.
I think that's the best 1-2 punch of freshman hitters I've seen in a while in this league. But they've scored 115 runs in league play.
Yeah.
Which means and Morgan and Cruz have hit in the league, right? So that means it's their other guys, and particularly the bottom half of that lineup, where they're just not getting anything. But that's going to be a very interesting test case. You do see some 13 and 17, sometimes even 12 and 18 teams get in. LSU, I have a feeling. Well, first of all, if LSU can say pull 5 of 6, I think 14 and 16 gets the Tigers in with that RPI at that point, because Alabama's a top 30 RPI team at this point. That helps you a bit. A&M on the road, A&M 62 in the RPI, so you're not going to suffer. Your road record's going to look pretty good, which I think theirs is. I'll have to check on it, but that's going to be very interesting to see how this goes for LSU here on out. And if they do finish well, how the committee treats them. To me, I think they've got a definite case to be in. And oh, by the way, that road record, 8 and 6. Let's say you go to College Station and you win 3 of those. 11 and 6 on the road, probably top 20 RPI. Yeah, the conference record may be kind of ugly, but I think at that point LSU's in.
Yeah, we had talked about their schedule and just how brutal it was, early on, and then you're looking ahead and you're like, wow, to do what they did, and it seems like everything just goes back to Ole Miss, doesn't it? For them to be able to win that series against Ole Miss several weeks ago, that seemed like a big boost, just knowing that they were in that part of the schedule where we were looking back and saying, man, they've already played Mississippi State, Tennessee, Vanderbilt. They had just played South Carolina, Ole Miss, and they had Arkansas, and it's just we kept mentioning just how brutal kind of the schedule had played out for them, and knowing that this was kind of their opportunity in these last 3 series against Auburn, Alabama, and Texas A&M. But like you said, I mean, I think they're going to be in a pretty good spot here. Now, obviously, you have to come out and win the series against Alabama, but I mean, I think it is a pretty nice spot to be in. You don't want to be sitting here at 9 and 15 in the league, but I think just from a scheduling standpoint, you could ask for a better schedule if Missouri's on there somewhere, probably. But I think it does play out to where it'll be interesting to see kind of how LSU finishes this, because, like you said, I mean, they go out and win 2 against Auburn there to start the series. I know they lost that one on Saturday, a tough one. They're close to getting a sweep there, but now you get to come back and play Alabama. They've got that game too against Louisiana Tech tomorrow night. But I think that it's one where LSU has certainly seemingly turned a corner a little bit, and I think maybe it did kind of start with that Ole Miss series. Just sort of knowing the level of competition they had played to that point, and just never sort of getting a break or things being able to ease up. Well, now you win this Auburn series like most thought you probably should. Now you get a chance to potentially win this Alabama series, and then that the last one against Texas A&M, like you said, not a bad team, but there's still a lot of opportunity there to go out and win a couple of those. So yeah, I mean, I think LSU is probably one of the more intriguing teams here down the stretch, just based on how their schedule plays out and whether they can come up with enough of those wins. So,
well, who else is in that boat too is Georgia, and I have to think if the committee goes by the eye test, I think Georgia gets in, because if you watch that series in Arkansas, and I did watch some of it, Georgia was so competitive. And they lose 2 or 3, but the composite score of that series was 11-10 Arkansas. Again, this is a team that just whipped Vanderbilt like nobody's handled them all year in Nashville about a month ago. So that, to me, if you can either hang with or just really thrash an elite team at times, to me, that's like if you're gonna go through tests and say, okay, what's going to be the tiebreaker? I want to know how competitive are you when you play the best of the best. Georgia's been that, and we talked about how last week things weren't looking great for the Bulldogs, right, because the schedule ended at Arkansas, at Florida, then Ole Miss at home. Well, you get 1 of 3 at Arkansas, which helps. And again, you're competitive. You go to Florida next weekend, which is going to be tough because Florida plays really well at home. But let's say you get one there, and then you can take 2 of 3 at Ole Miss. Okay, now you're 14-16 with some really marquee series wins. I think again that to me is the formula to getting in the tournament.
Well, if you're Georgia, I think the one thing that's going to stand out is you're looking back at that Auburn series and you're thinking, man, if we just win another one of those games, like we should not have lost the series at home to Auburn. And otherwise though, like you said, I mean, you just go up and down. We mentioned it earlier. You talked about you go back to the series win against Vanderbilt a month ago, and yeah, I mean they like we mentioned, I mean they had their chances against Arkansas. They put themselves in a position to have a chance to win that series too. So it's just the scheduling, and that's what we always say with all these teams we talked about. It's just that the flow of the schedule, and for some teams it works out better than others in terms of maybe up and down a bit, but for some it's just having all these teams in a row. And now if you're Georgia, you've gone through that stretch of playing Kentucky and Missouri and Auburn. Now, it's the one we knew was going to be challenging against Arkansas. You've got to go to Florida here now, and you've got that unpredictable team in Ole Miss. So, yeah, I think Georgia's another one of those. We mentioned LSU, and it's going to be fascinating for everyone. But they're one, too, that's kind of fascinating just to see, knowing how their schedule plays out, which is sort of the opposite of LSU, knowing that they've still got, 2 pretty tough series here against Florida and Ole Miss. And, yeah, just seeing if, can they come out and potentially win a couple at Florida, bring some of that momentum from the Arkansas series. I don't know how much you gain just from being in games and losing them, but they still won a game there. And to be able to maybe take that into Florida, possibly come out with a couple there. Going to be easier said than done, but like you said, if you just look at how they play in the eye test, that's not a bad team at all.
Somebody asked me on the radio a couple of weeks ago about what teams could get to Omaha, and I said don't sleep on Georgia.
Yeah,
and I don't think that was the answer they were expecting. But my point with them all along has been, you look at the arms, and Webb has been really good for them, was really good again this weekend. Jonathan Cannon wasn't so good against Arkansas, but Arkansas makes a lot of pitchers not look so good. And Cannon is a first-round talent. I mean, you get 2 stud pitchers who can go 6, 7, 8 innings into games. Jaden Woods has been pretty good for them. They've got a couple of arms on the back end. I mean, in Georgia, that's the thing. Since Scott Strickland got there, and really it took him 3-4 years to establish an identity as a program, they've recruited power arms.
Yeah.
And I think that Georgia's got enough. Again, this is one of these things we said all along. Once you get some of these teams out of conference play and let them play other guys, it kind of gets easier.
Right.
It should get easier. I mean, I think you could make a case that winning in Hoover, just like if everybody's going all out and playing for a title there, which not everybody does, because sometimes you're trying to get rest before the NCAA tournament. And Georgia was a team that under Dave Perno was just notorious for, kind of throwing in the towel and not doing much. South Carolina and others. Those 2 are teams that a lot of times they'd come down there and not have a lot to play for, and they would take quick exits. And you saw South Carolina do that a lot when it was in that 3-year run of dominance where it won 2 national titles and almost another. The Gamecocks would sometimes go 0-2 in Hoover, get the rest, and it seemed to behoove them from there. So, yeah, that's one that I just think that Georgia, I think they've got enough arms on the back end. If Cannon and Webb can go deep into starts, that's a team that, like, if you wake up in a month from now, they're in Omaha, I wouldn't totally be surprised.
Yeah, and it goes back to the schedule. As you mentioned, it's just, not a lot of teams are playing, 3 straight weeks or 4 straight weeks like we've seen some teams do, where you're just, you're playing top 10 teams all in that stretch. And, for Georgia, they just played the number 1 team in the country. Now they got to go to the number 10 or number 9 team, or you just go up and down. Like, you've got 3 top 10 teams here that you're going to play in your final 3 parts of the series. And you're like, man, you can take a lot out of that, just, seeing that you're playing those good teams. But like you said, sometimes if you just remove that and you're like, all right, let's play some other teams outside of this daunting schedule in the SEC, maybe you learn a little bit more about a team, and you kind of understand that these are teams that even have these kind of records in the SEC are still pretty good. You just there's only so many. Someone has to win each game, and when you have these teams above them, like Arkansas and Mississippi State and Tennessee and all those, it's challenging to kind of find those wins, and you put them outside the SEC, and maybe they have a better opportunity to do that. So.
Yeah, I think Ben Harris was the other bullpen arm I was trying to think of. He's been really good for them in spots too. So, and when you have a couple of guys that can really stretch out over longer periods out of that bullpen, which I think both those guys can go 2-3 innings, that really helps you. In a year where a lot of teams have that, but just to say, I think Georgia's got a couple too. Okay, I was at Vandy Bama at both games that got played. That was interesting because Kumar Rocker had about the oddest start I've ever seen. I don't know if you got a chance to watch it, but it was bizarre. That kid comes out and he throws 16 strikes in a row to start the game. He gets 4 strikeouts in the first because somebody swung over the top of a slider that wasn't close to being a strike. But that's the thing with Kumar Rocker, is out of the hand, it's hard to tell that slider from the fastball at times, and Alabama was really having trouble picking that up early. And so you saw that, and then I think he strikes out the side in the second. He does. So he's 7 up, 7 down. Then Alabama gets a double from Jim Jarvis, who's an interesting player. Ground rule double to center where Enrique Bradfield was playing way in. It bounces over his head. They get a couple more hits. They put up 3 runs just like that, which you would have seen. Georgia did that to him too. You see teams that will ambush him early, and that's the way that you beat Vanderbilt, is you get some runs in a burst against him. So he ends up having a line, I think off the top of my head, he goes 5, he gives up 6, all earned, walks 5, gives up 5 hits, but none of them around the park, but he strikes out 13. So his defense registers 3 outs for him, but I'm not putting that on the defense because the balls were hit pretty hard. It was just a bizarre game. It is not often you see a guy just alternate streaks of dominance and disaster the way that he did. I don't know if there was a pitch tipping thing or what it was, but that was one of those outings. And I saw Tim Corbin after the game, and I just said to him, that's one of the more bizarre games that I have seen here ever. And I've been to a lot of games at Hawkins Field, and he said, yeah, we were having that same conversation too. So they get that one. And then they go to Saturday, and everybody's just thinking, man, they don't have Jack Leiter, and what are they going to do? Patrick Riley comes out and just shoves the fastball down their throats the whole time. And I kept watching it going, why can't Alabama hit this? Because they know fastball's coming. And it was the way that Leiter threw against South Carolina, where he just worked that high fastball and they couldn't handle it. But it was kind of funny because, Blake, I'm sitting there watching Alabama just fastball take, fastball take, fastball take. And that's 85% of what Patrick Riley was throwing. Now, when I watched the replay, it looked harder to hit from center field than I think it did from behind home plate. I mean, they just couldn't square it up, and I couldn't figure out why. But that was a really interesting turn of events in that series, to see Leiter go out and then a freshman who's been kind of shaky in his starts come in and win that series for them. But big boost for Vandy. I think the Commodores are going to probably be disadvantaged by not getting that third game in the overall title chase. But that was an interesting series, the way the pitching played out. Dylan Smith for Alabama, finally got to see him in person. The stuff is good, but he couldn't command his breaking stuff earlier. He didn't trust it for some reason. And Vandy just sat fastballs and was jacking those all over the park. So it was easier to understand kind of why Dylan Smith struggles, and Tyler Ross, Vanderbilt, just really hit that kid hard. So Alabama, I don't know, just with not having Prelip now and not having Antoine Jean, I think Alabama, I thought healthy, that's a tournament team. I don't know that Alabama's got enough left now.
Yeah, it doesn't do yourself any favors, like you said, based on where you're at this point. It was, if you kind of go back, it's like, well, it's nice to get the sweep at Missouri, but now we said sort of an LSU team that's playing well. You got to go on the road there. You got to finish with Mississippi State, who has, you mentioned is a team that could wind up on top of this thing. So yeah, not an ideal spot. I think, for Alabama. But I mean, what a what a wild series, like you said. I only played 2 games, but that game on Friday night, that the third, and if you just watch the third and fourth inning, like, you got your 9 innings worth, just in those 2 innings, just based on how that game played out there. But yeah, it's I keep thinking, Vanderbilt's going to be interesting because some of those things, you've talked about throughout the season. There's a lot of intriguing elements to this team. And just, you have seen some of those wild type games. Now, obviously, maybe not to the level of what we saw in that game on Friday night against Alabama, but there have been a lot of those very interesting games in terms of how they played out. And it all goes back to the pitching. Jack Leiter, as you said, when you get him back in the tournament, what does that look like? And then, from there, that third starter, like, there's a lot of different things. I think that are very intriguing about Vanderbilt the rest of the way to see, can they be on that level, and obviously we know the potential, like they have the chance to go a very long way. There's no doubt about that. But there are just some things you look at with them, and you're still trying to kind of figure it out here with a couple weeks to go. And I think there's some pretty intriguing elements to them here as they move forward.
Well, that team's got a lot of questions, Blake.
Yeah.
Health being one of them. Isaiah Thomas, their right fielder, who's had a nice year, missed the whole week, and they plugged Troy LaNeve in right, who I don't know if he'd started the game all year, at least not in conference. He hits a home run, saw the ball pretty well all weekend. So Cooper Davis, who didn't play all last weekend, who started the year as their left fielder, he's been hurt twice and just looks slow and not himself. He gets a start in left again, 2 starts actually, because of the injuries elsewhere, and started to look more like Cooper Davis. But Jack Bulger didn't play this week, and they said there's not an injury in play. But that was really strange that we didn't see him for even and at bats. I don't know what's going on with that. Again, Leiter not on the 30-man roster. Ethan Smith, who I swear to God, I've said about 3 weekends in a row, I think he'll be their Sunday starter this week. Hadn't happened. It's a conditioning thing after he got held out for a COVID test that was positive that really wasn't. And they're careful with arms. You got to keep your guys in shape, and you don't want a guy just coming out of a 2-week quarantine and not throwing. So that's the issue there. So Vanderbilt really down arms coming into the weekend with 2 of the 3 guys that under normal circumstances you would have expected to start. So this team, it's going to be interesting to see how they play it, Blake, because I know Tim Corbin likes to win titles, but again, I bet you we don't see Leiter in Oxford next weekend is my guess. And if they don't get Ethan Smith in there and up to strength, and I think some of that is just going to be, we'll see him throw a couple innings at a time here the next couple weeks, maybe see him get a start in Hoover if he's ready by that point. But it's going to be very interesting to see how Vanderbilt plays it, because this is the team that I think if Leiter is healthy and throwing the way he was, that's the team to beat. Because with Rocker and Leiter, and especially with the Rockers done before, I just think that 1-2 punch is too tough to overcome, and they can hit enough. But a lot of question marks with this team right now, because that could go a lot of different ways.
Yeah, more questions than usual probably at this point in the season. You feel like, there's some teams you've really figured out and kind of pegged and know where they're going to go at this point. But I do think Vanderbilt's one of those that, yes, there are a lot of things they do well, and but it's you're playing the what if game. Well, what if Jack Leiter's not able to be back to kind of that level that we knew, and as you mentioned, I mean, they when you have Rocker and Leiter at their best, it's going to be really hard to beat Vanderbilt in a series, and we saw that early on in the season. Like we saw what the challenges are for the opponent trying to do that. But if that doesn't go back to that sort of level that he was at before. And if you can't get some of those other tiny things figured out, it could be interesting to see kind of how their season wraps up here. Even if we're looking beyond just the regular season, but they're one of the ones that's pretty interesting too. Just knowing that you are still playing the what if game here, even with a couple weeks left in the season.
Well, if you're trying to power rank them, and this question can be asked to a lot of teams, what team am I ranking?
Yeah,
am I ranking the one where Leiter doesn't pitch at all? Am I ranking the one where lighter pitches like he did the last 3 weeks?
Yeah.
Am I ranking the one where we presume that they're going to get him healthy and he's going to go back to being dominant? Because
Yeah.
that's a wide swing there. I still think that I think is still, even without him, maybe an Omaha team, because their lineup has looked pretty good lately. But I mean, again, I think if he and Rocker are pitching normally and you get Ethan Smith back, I think that they've got enough arms to where they're the team I least want to face, especially in places like Hoover and in places like Omaha. And oh, by the way, they got a center fielder who's the fastest player in college baseball and just makes some spectacular plays. So to me, it's just, I think more importantly for Vanderbilt, it's not how do they finish this regular season, it's how healthy are they going into the NCAAs.
Yeah, and I think you go off of what you see right now, and that's why we have the questions that we do. If you project ahead, all you can do is go off of where they are at this point, and that's where I think it opens up more of the questions than probably we would have had, a month and a half ago, whatever. So.
Anything else on baseball before we flip to hoops for just a minute?
Nope. Should be, like I said, should be fun. I know we'll talk throughout the week about this big Tennessee Arkansas series, but yeah, it should be another fun week of action, and some decent games too in the midweek there. I think we talked about a couple of them, but yeah, should be a fun week.
Well, big week for LSU basketball in terms of recruiting, Blake.
Yeah, they picked up something they needed, and that was to add some size there, and they did that with Efton Reed, who comes in, a 6'11" kid, played at IMG Academy, 5-star, top 25 recruit. So that's significant, and it's funny because I was talking to someone, I guess last week, trying to project the SEC going into next season, and I kept saying, there are 7 teams that I feel, pretty confidently about and what they're going to look like next season. Then I said, then there's LSU, who's probably the 8th, because you still wanted to see the roster fill out a little bit. And what do? I think it was legitimately like a couple hours later they went out and got him. I just looked. I mean, it's another 5-star guy for LSU. It gives them a lot of size at 6'11", and it's able to kind of make up some of the ground that we know that they're going to lose just from losing those big 4 that they did from last year's team, who were not only, those guys had experience. Those guys could play and had experienced the SEC for a couple of seasons at least. So I think for LSU, you're putting together a new group like a lot of other teams in the SEC are. Do I think I would put them ahead of some of the other teams just by landing someone like Reed? I don't know. I still think they're probably going to be in that, I want to say probably the 4 to 6, 7 range maybe, just because, yes, I mean, they brought in Xavier Pinson, they've got Seneca Knight. We talked about them adding Miller and those guys, but I still think you want to see how everything comes together for them. And I think even in adding talent, I still am curious for them, like many other teams. When you just flip your entire rotation, which is what a lot of teams seemingly are going to be doing for the most part, you're going to have a majority of your rotation is going to look a lot different this next season. It's all about the chemistry. It's all about seeing how things come along. So that's what I'm most curious about, because a lot of teams are just adding talent, but how that talent comes together in a year like this, where you're going to have teams that may have experience from an age standpoint, but from an actual on-court chemistry standpoint, you're going to have a lot of inexperienced teams who have not played together much. And so I think I look at a team like LSU and I'm like, okay, what are going to be the things that separate them, from the teams like Alabama and Arkansas and ones like that, Tennessee, Kentucky, all of those. I don't know that I'm putting LSU above those teams in particular right now, and Auburn too. I'm probably not putting LSU above Auburn, but they're going to be in the conversation, and they're going to have a chance to, certainly be an NCAA tournament team and win a lot of games. So,
here's a question I'm mulling over in my mind. When's the last time LSU had a stud big?
Well, I mean, Naz Reid, I guess, is probably, he's the closest just from, but he wasn't necessarily either just a traditional, I guess, big man either, in terms of just how he plays. But I mean, he's someone too that I think with Reed, like he's another guy that, and I think this is what they prefer. Like they want guys like everyone at this point. Like you want guys who can step out and make jump shots. and I think that's where he's going to be able to help them overall just by adding someone like this. So I mean, that's the thing too, and LSU, like it's a team that plays a lot on like they're a guard based sort of the way they play, like the we talked about. I mean, look, Javante
Oh, I
Smart,
mean, yeah, definitely
yeah,
last year. That's what they were.
yeah,
Their quote unquote bigs were more,
right,
perimeter scoring, and yeah, they're not back to the basket. I mean, not that anybody really plays that anymore. I guess here's where this question comes from. Okay, your formative years often form your opinions of programs. You remember them having Shaq and
yeah.
good grief, the other big man at the time. And so it's just kind of funny to look back at LSU and all of a sudden they get a 5-star big and I'm just going, when's the last time that happened?
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is they still need that size because the thing is, for LSU and we've said it, like their defense, it's been well documented at this point. Like that's been a problem for several years now. Like their defense has not been to the level that they want it to be at. And so when you can add this type of size, at least maybe it helps you a little bit in terms of defending in the paint. So I don't know that Reed just steps in and all of a sudden he's just a dominant guy who's out blocking shots everywhere and all that. I don't necessarily think that's going to be the case, but just having that size, making things a little bit more difficult at the rim, knowing that a lot of your game's going to be perimeter oriented. You got a lot of guards you've brought in, guys who are going to play out on the perimeter. But yeah, you need a guy like this in the middle, and that's that's you're plugging in a potential weakness, and so that certainly helps you in that category.
Anything else of note before we end the show today?
No, I think we've talked about most of everything else. Basketball wise, I'm sure there's still people transferring. It's just I think though we're starting to get things figured out on the basketball front, and obviously we'll have a lot more talk about football here as we get closer to the real meat of things, which is year round. But yeah, we'll have a lot more football stuff too over on the site, southeastern14.com.
All right, I'm Chris Lee. He's Blake Lovell. Thank you for listening to the Southeastern 14 podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. Give us some nice 5-star reviews and comments if you would, please. That helps us get found. And check out our content at the website. All that's free. Southeastern14.com. We had some wrap-ups of weekend games. I'll have some team power ratings coming probably at some point Monday morning or afternoon. We'll power rank the hitters and the pitchers, the best 14 as we always do. But anyway, thank you for listening to the 14 podcast. We'll catch you again on Tuesday.